delighted to be able to speak to you about issues which are relevant to our country, notions of minorities, notions of citizenship and nationality. I'm going to discuss two very different cases today. One, the case of the Rohingya refugees from Myanmar, and secondly, I'm going to talk about the destruction of the Ramu temples, which are Buddhist temples. And both of these events are very close to each other in terms of time. They happened more or less in 2012. The Ramu destruction took place. In 2012 June, we had the first round of Rohingya refugees coming through. And of course, the Rohingya refugees began much earlier and has been continuing since then. For those of you who were at my earlier talk on Rohingyas, I will go through the same slides. So you may find it a repetition, but I have more time today. That day I have 15 minutes, today I have 30 minutes, so I'll be able to elaborate a little more on this. So my first talk will be on the Rohingyas. Now the first thing about the Rohingya refugees is who they are and why there is violence about them. So I will discuss the factors behind their marginalization and the violence that has been inflicted upon them. So that is what has happened in Myanmar. Then I take up the story in Bangladesh as to how does the government of Bangladesh react to these refugees. Okay? And then how do the refugees themselves cope with the situation that the Bangladesh government has put them into. And I will argue that they've done some very interesting and innovative things to survive. And I will discuss what those things are, and also the problems that the Rohingya refugees face, continue to face in Bangladesh, despite the fact that they've been able to stay there. But they're not been able to stay there in peace. There are all kinds of hazards and problems which they have to face. So I will just deal with that, and then I will go into some concluding remarks and what we can learn from the experience of the Rohingya refugees. Now the Rohingyas, for those of you who are experts, this is nothing new, but for those of you who don't know, the Rohingyas are a small Sunni Muslim minority in Rakhine state of Myanmar, which we call Arakan, but they call it Rakhine, and it's a Buddhist majority state. Burma itself is a Buddhist majority country, but within Rakhine state, even though there is a Rakhine Buddhist majority, there are also the Muslims who are called Rohingyas. Incidentally, the Rakhines also exist in Bangladesh. They're called Mogs and Rakhine in Bangladesh. You will find them in Cox's Bazar, in say Maheshkhali. You'll also find them in Odisha, the Rakhine temples and so on. So these groups actually lived over this whole region. The boundaries are made by governments and states, but the people themselves were spread all over the place. Anyway, what the Rohingyas have faced is massive and forced out-migration. And I'm going to have to cut the story short because there isn't time to go through everything. But the first expulsion of the Rohingyas took place in 1978, and it has continued since then. So if we take the story now, the number of Rohingyas still left in Myanmar, the estimates vary. I've got 750,000, but some will argue that more than 1.5 million are still in Myanmar. The estimates are not very clear. What we do know is another 700,000 exist in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, in Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, but mostly in the Gulf states and in Pakistan. And in Bangladesh, it's at least 400,000, maybe 500,000. There are varying estimates. So you could say about a quarter, about 25% to 30% of the Rohingyas are in Bangladesh. Now, this is the area where the, let me see, this cursor works. Well, not very But you can see this arrow here. This is Bangladesh, the border of Bangladesh and Burma. This is Arakan state or Rakhine state. And Burma, of course, is huge and has many other groups of people. But this is the area, Rakhine state, and particularly North Rakhine state is where the Rohingyas live. So this is the area that we're talking about. Note, because I'm going to discuss this later, this area is the Chittagong hill tracts, which is populated by ethnic minorities, mostly Buddhists, but Buddhists, Hindus, and Christians. And this is North Rakhine state with Rohingya Muslims. This strip here is a kind of no man's land. It's a kind of buffer zone between these two areas. And as I will argue during the course of the afternoon, the conflicts in Rakhine state and the conflicts in the Chittagong hill tracts are beginning to interact with each other. And this is what we see in the Ramu temple destructions. But I will discuss that later. Now, what happened to the Rohingyas in Myanmar? Their citizenship and political and civil rights were chipped away. They were actually not even given very much at independence. Burma got its independence from colonial British rule in 1948. At the time of independence, there was a listing of what are called the national groups of Burma, and the Rohingyas were not included amongst them. In 1974, there was an Emergency Immigration Act which stripped the Rohingyas of citizenship rights in Burma. This is when it begins, though it is formalized in 1982 when there is another act called Citizenship Act of Myanmar, in which Rohingyas were denied both full citizenship and associate citizenship. In other words, since they lived in Myanmar, in Arakan, but they were not treated as citizens, they had no rights, they were effectively stateless in their own country, and without any rights for that matter. The persecution of the Rohingyas begins in 1977-78. It begins earlier, but the really big event is 1977-78 when the Burmese regime launched an operation called Nagamin. Nagamin stands for Dragon King. The objectives of this mission was, of this operation was to register, to distinguish between bona fide citizens and people who were treated called illegal immigrants. The Rohingyas were treated as illegal immigrants rather than bona fide citizens. And so they were the subject of arrests, torture, rapes, confiscation of land, destruction of mosques, etc. As a result, 250,000 Rohingyas fled over the border to Bangladesh. This is the beginning, the first major influx of Rohingyas. Unfortunately, the Bangladesh government initially, even though it received them with some degree of welcome, decided to send them back. So most of these refugees were sent back against their wishes. They did not want to go back to Myanmar because they knew what they would face, but the government of Bangladesh almost unilaterally and against international law sent them back. So when the Rohingyas returned to Burma, they faced arrest, torture, imprisonment, and in other words, they had been thrown out because they were not wanted. They were thrown back, and obviously the Burmese regime and the local inhabitants did not want them, and so they had to suffer twice from this operation. Now, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, this is a slightly enlarged version of the same map that we're talking about. So here is Bangladesh. This is the Chittagong hill tracts here. This is Cox's Bazar. This is the border between Myanmar and Bangladesh. This is the Nak River, which is the river which forms the international boundary, which is crossed by boats. And the people who come from North Rakhine State, if you like, are in the green shaded area. The brown shaded area is Bangladesh, And this is where the maximum concentration of Rohingya refugees is to be found. They're now spread out from this place to Cox's Bazar, Bahadurban, upwards to Chittagong district, and indeed other parts of the country. But this is the maximum concentration of the Rohingyas. Nearly 13 to 14 years later, 1991-92, the Burmese regime launched another operation called Pyi Thaya, which stands for Clean and Beautiful Nation. And basically, the objective of this operation was ethnic cleansing, as you might gather from the name. It was preceded by increased military presence, concentration of armaments, troops, firepower in North Rakhine state, and then the use of violence, persecution, religious and communal conflicts. This led to the expulsion of another huge wave of refugees from that area to Bangladesh. The estimate is between 200,000 to 250,000. I think 250,000 is actually closer to the mark. So another 250,000 were expelled. Now, this expulsion of Rohingyas did not stop in 1992. It has continued in phases ever since then, and it is still going on. Significant expulsions took place in 1996, 97, 2001, 2009. In 2012, you may remember TV stories, images of Rohingyas in boats, boat people coming for shelter to the Bangladesh coast and being turned away by the Bangladesh security forces. Many of them were hurt, many of them needed immediate attention, but the government of Bangladesh decided it would not help. In some cases, they were given food and some medical treatment, but they were still turned back. In other cases, they did not even get that. They were simply turned back. Even now, in 2014, there is a census going on in Myanmar, and the authorities have made it a point not to list Rohingyas as Rohingyas. If they want to list themselves, they have to say we are Bengalis, by which it is meant that they are Bangladeshi citizens who are living in Myanmar. So if they refuse to do that, they are persecuted. So basically what we've been seeing from 1978 up to now is ethnic cleansing of the Rohingyas by the Myanmar state forces, and specifically Myanmar has many ethnic groups, but the Rakhines, the Buddhist Rakhines, or Rakhines, ethnic group, and their monks in the Arakan. This is just a sense of the river, the Nagpur. This is actually Shahpuri's Deep. This is at the far end of the peninsula. Across the river, on the other side, it's not very clear in this photograph, but there are mountains, and you can see the other bank of the Nag where Myanmar is. And this is an example of the kind of boat which is used in the Nag River, which may, boats of this kind have been used by the Rohingyas to come over, but also smaller boats, so which I don't have the time to show you the pictures, but I have them, which I can show you later. So what did the government do? The government of Bangladesh Now, the government of Bangladesh had three possible alternatives how to deal with the refugees. One we can call integration, the second we can call repatriation, the third we can call resettlement. Integration means that to allow the refugees to stay and to integrate with the local population. So basically giving them asylum and shelter in Bangladesh. Number two, the Bangladesh government could send them back to Myanmar, which is repatriation. And number three, resettlement. It means that they are sent, but not to Myanmar, but to a third country. There are countries like Australia, Canada, which take a certain number of migrants. So that would have been resettlement. So these were the three options that could have been pursued by the government of Bangladesh. What did the government of Bangladesh actually do? Its first option of integration, let's consider integration. To integrate, the Rohingya refugees should have been given asylum, should have been given the status of refugees. They should have been allowed to work so that they could survive. The government of Bangladesh refused to give them any of these rights. So as I will discuss later, the bulk of the Rohingya refugees were not even recognized as refugees. Only 30,000 or so now are in official camps who are regarded as refugees, official refugees. More than 400,000 others are there in the area that I showed you. They are mixed with the local population in the villages, in the towns, in Cox's Bazar, and also beyond Cox's Bazar in other districts. These were not recognized as refugees, and therefore they were not allowed international help, no food, but no rights either. So basically, if you think about it, it was an impossible situation for the refugees. They had no rights, but they had no access to food, they had no land, no citizenship, but they were also not allowed to work. So how were they going to survive? The government of Bangladesh did not bother except with that. It just made those rules unwritten. So that is, so basically, the first option, integration, was officially ruled out. Later on, I will argue that integration has actually taken place, but not because of the government, because of other means. Number two option was forced repatriation. Because as I explained earlier, the Rohingya refugees did not want to go back to Burma. So what the government did was to sign a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with the Burmese government. During 1992-93, forced repatriation of Rohingyas began. It was resumed. As I said, there was one round of forced repatriation after 1978. So it resumed after 1992-93. Again, violence was used with threats, and camp officials penalized refugees if they refused to go. So basically, they were not supposed to be forcibly repatriated. That's against international law. The UNHCR, which is the UN High Commission for Refugees, its role is to make sure that there is no forced repatriation. But after the UNHCR was complicit in sending back the refugees by claiming that conditions in Burma were okay, they could go back. Because of the use of violence and threats and forcibly taking Rohingyas back to Burma, at one point they resisted. They protested, and then there were scuffles between them and the security forces. In one incident, 15 Rohingyas were killed, and many more were injured. Nonetheless, the government and the UNHCR continued large-scale forced repatriation of refugees during the 1990s. Even though at the same time as the refugees were being sent back to Burma, those who had been sent back before were returning to Bangladesh clandestinely across the border. So it was as if the government of Bangladesh and the UNHCR was not willing to see what was happening, or not willing to register that. They continued to send people back forcibly, despite the fact that a stream in the opposite direction was already evident. In 1997, there was a particular incident where at night, mostly women and children, 350 of them, were rounded up and at gunpoint and deported to Myanmar. This time, in one of the official camps, I think it was Nayapara, refugees were very angry. They took over the camp, and they refused to take any humanitarian services, and they held out for about 14 months. It was not until 1998, 14 months later, that security forces were able to regain control of that camp. Now, what is very interesting is during this 14-month period, when refugees were protesting and holding on to the camp, there was no repatriation. What that shows is that when people resist, it has an impact. Repatriation is suspended for that period. It suggests that resistance is worthwhile. Resistance should be undertaken. However, as soon as the camp was recaptured and the refugees were disarmed, it was resumed, repatriation. But then, by 2001, repatriation stopped. Not because of resistance by the refugees, or not because the Bangladesh government and the UNHCR wanted to stop it, but the Burmese government set up such opposition, such bureaucratic obstacles, that it became impossible to send any refugees back. So it was because of the role of the Burmese government that forced repatriation stopped from around 2001. So that is option 2, repatriation. The third option is resettlement. In 2006, a program was launched to take some cleared Rohingya refugees to countries like Canada and Australia. It's very small numbers. I mean, compared to nearly 500,000 in Bangladesh, nearly 500,000. Not more than 2,000 were listed for this program, of which less than 1,000 were actually able to be resettled in third countries. In 2010, the government of Bangladesh decided that it did not want a resettlement program anymore. The argument was, because of the resettlement program, they felt this gave encouragement to more Rohingyas to come from Burma. So they saw, they did not give importance to the violence and torture which the Rohingyas were facing in Burma. They only saw that Rohingyas were coming because they saw the temptation or the incentive of getting settlement in Canada or Australia. And so the government stopped the third option, the resettlement program. However, as I will discuss later, desperate Rohingya refugees, despite the refusal of the government to send people for resettlement, have undertaken irregular migration on boats. So these boat people, they are Rohingyas as well as people from Burma and Bangladesh who have now joined them, ordinary people, who get on the boats and try to go to Malaysia, to Singapore, not Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, some to Indonesia, and for some the objective is to go to Australia. So that kind of irregular resettlement has been going on, despite refusal by the government. So one conclusion we can draw is that even though the government decided that there would be no resettlement, it was in no position to stop clandestine resettlement. And resettlement in that sense has continued, involving both people and other groups operating through legal and illegal routes. There is a large colony of Rohingyas in Bangkok, in Thailand, parts of Malaysia, and indeed in other countries. And these people have gone there through their own means. In 2008, the government rejected the application of Rohingyas to become voters in Bangladesh. In 2009 and 10, there was large-scale crackdown on the Rohingya refugees who have been there from, say, 1978 onwards. The objective of this was arresting illegal immigrants, in quotation marks, and reporting them back to Myanmar. Now, there were certain political changes in Bangladesh in the nature of the government which made this possible, because this was rather harsh compared to even what had been going on before, to actually hunt down refugees and throw them out. It sounds like Britain and Europe, where they're hunting down illegal refugees. This wasn't the case in Bangladesh, but during 2007-8 there was a military government, then there were elections and the political government came into power, and these governments were not sympathetic to the Rohingyas. So you had that kind of treatment. However, it is told that there is a change there may be a possibility of the government's policy towards Rohingyas, the possibility of change in that. There is discussion about it, but so far there is no definite decision. So I've outlined to you what happened in Myanmar in terms of the expulsion of the refugees, and then what actually happened in Bangladesh once they came here, the kind of options they were given. So the last part of the talk on the Rohingyas is what were the consequences of the Bangladesh government policies and what were the responses of the people. First of all, the government has discouraged most programs, apart from the ones that I mentioned. Anything like, say, education, health programs, literacy, anything that would have been good for the refugees, most of them have been refused by the government of Bangladesh, using the same argument that if these facilities are given to them, this will be an attraction and more Rohingyas will come from Myanmar. The government has formally closed down two major avenues of solving this problem. One of integration with the local community, another of resettlement in third countries. And the other option, repatriation, has been closed down by the government of Burma. So basically all three formal options have been closed down, either by the government of Bangladesh or the government of Burma. But what have been the responses of the refugees? Did they accept this kind of closing down of avenues? And what I'm going to argue with you is that they have actually managed to overturn some of these government decisions by their own efforts. First of all, as I mentioned, the refugees can be divided into those who are in camps. These are called registered refugees, and that's a very tiny fraction, about 30,000 refugees. But they are very lucky in the sense that they get international attention, they get international food, even though the food is very, it's like refugee camp food. It's not like the kind of food people normally take. And they have, to some extent, been able to undertake additional activities to earn money and to buy their chili and to buy their spices, which they don't get from the international humanitarian agencies. But they have become incredibly dependent on assistance and food aid, which means that they lack initiative. They've not really done anything. And, they've become, like a captive population which is fed, but which does not have any initiative, which isn't doing very much. Now, the bulk of the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, 93%, are unregistered. They're not in official camps. A small fraction is in unofficial campsites, but the unofficial camps are not supported. They don't receive food assistance. The bulk of them, as I said before, were dispersed among the local people in the villages and towns of Bangladesh. And I should say that the local population of Bangladesh there is also not very rich. They are fairly poor. There is not much to distinguish the state of the ordinary people and the refugees. They are almost equally poor. These unregistered refugees who live amongst the local population do not have access to assistance. They are not given asylum. They are not given protection by the state. They do not get any food rations. What have been their options? This is just a shot from one of these Rohingya houses. You see two girls of the family. Again, I have more pictures of Rohingya refugees living in the villages. As you can see, it's not a very great living accommodation. They have managed to survive against many constraints. Okay. Before I go into the constraints faced by the Rohingya refugees, let me say what they've done to survive. They have taken any job that they can get. Usually, if the locals will do a job for 100 taka, the Rohingyas will do it for 50 taka or 70 taka. So they offer themselves as cheaper wage workers. And that way, the employers have demand for Rohingyas. The same applies for other kinds of activities. that they are basically underselling themselves in order, because they're desperate, they have to survive. So they do this. Secondly, if a policeman stops them and threatens to deport them, they pay them bribes. Not only the police, various government officials, border guards, everywhere. And this payment of money to stay on, I was reading yesterday in the library about the Rohingyas in Bangkok. They have to do exactly the same thing. It's a common pattern to pay your way through. Most importantly, what they have done is they have become long-term clients of particular employers or landlords and so on. And they are a reliable source of labor, working at a cheaper wage rate that the employer can depend upon. For the landlords, they will pay rent, they will pay more rent than the locals, and so they are attractive tenants. This way, they have they've cultivated long-term relationships with people who have control over employment, over residential houses, and these groups are quite influential groups, the landlords, the employers, they are Bangladeshis. And if they say, if they tell the government that we want the Rohingyas because we want them to be our laborers or our tenants, the government of Bangladesh cannot dismiss that altogether. So basically, they have worked, they've made themselves indispensable and very helpful for their patrons, their employers, their landlords, and so on. And that group, these interest groups, have in a sense pleaded on their behalf with the government of Bangladesh, and therefore we do not see wholesale expulsion of Rohingyas from Bangladesh. But they are exploited by the same employers and the landlords. It's not that it's done for charity. They are exploited, but at least they are given the protection that they need to stay. In some cases, the people who were employing Rohingyas as fishermen, when they were arrested, the fishermen were arrested, the employers went to the police and paid for their release. The same happened in Cox's Bazar. Construction workers, Rohingyas were arrested, and their employers went and paid the police. So you have to understand how the system works. These employers would not pay for the Rohingyas normally. They pay for the Rohingyas because they obviously have something to gain from it. So it is in their self-interest, enlightened self-interest, to keep the Rohingyas and to protect them from the police and other kinds of exploiters. Now, despite the fact that the Rohingyas have managed to get themselves protection, they are still subject to all kinds of constraints, and I've listed some of this here. They constantly face the threat of arbitrary arrest, assault, robbery, eviction from their shelters, deportation to Myanmar, as well as extortion of cash, goods, and other services from them. One classic example is Rohingyas who are working somewhere else, returning to their families. If they're on a bus and they have their wage earnings with them, they'll be stopped at checkposts by the police, by the forest officials, and they will be identified, and if they have any money, the money will be taken away from them. The sheer daylight robbery, but this is one kind of threat that they face. Refugee women and girls, Rohingya, going out for wage work, going to the market for transactions, going to the forest to collect firewood, are all subject to threats of sexual harassment and rape. Sometimes they, even in their own homes, in the camps, they can be subject to that kind of behavior. Now, who are the people who were involved in this? The perpetrators include local officials, powerful local villagers, but also in some cases Rohingya men as well. So it's a complex case for the women. This is a shot from one of the unofficial campsites, which is not giving international assistance. This is Kutupalam. If some of you recognize this. Now, Of late, there have been acts of discrimination and hostility against the Rohingya refugees. First of all, there is popular perception, particularly amongst the people who are working class, who need wage labor, that the Rohingyas are taking away their jobs by working for cheaper prices. Okay. Secondly, there is a fairly xenophobic anti-immigrant press, particularly in Cox's Bazar town, which constantly propagates anti-Rohingya propaganda. In some places, because of these opposition, restrictions have been put on Rohingyas from working in the labor market. So in some places, if they want to be garments workers or rickshaw pullers, they have to show national identity cards. In other words, their status, as the fact that they are stateless and not recognized as refugees, means they don't have any documents to show in these places, and therefore they cannot give such activity. Rohingya women who previously could access microcredit schemes are now required to produce an ID card, which effectively means that they cannot get microcredit. Even school children, Rohingya children, have now been excluded from government schools in many places because they are required to produce either a birth certificate or some kind of nationality document. And to the extent that they can't do that, they are denied schooling. So things have got worse in that sense. Now, over the years, Rohingyas have been enlisted as voters. Hundreds of thousands, so lakhs of Rohingyas have been enlisted as voters. They were enlisted as voters mainly because of the enlightened self-interest of local politicians who wanted to use them as their vote banks. And this went on until 2007, 2008, when the army undertook voter registration checks. And during that period, nearly 100,000 Rohingyas who were on the voter list and therefore had some kind of document which they could use for citizenship claims were thrown out of the voters list. So it in a sense made them, first of all, they lost whatever semblance of official documentation that they had. Secondly, because they were no longer on the voters list, they were useless for the politicians who got them on the voters list. They would not give votes. So the politicians lost interest in them. So the Rohingyas lost in all terms. They were dealing from the patronage structures of the powerful local politicians who would no longer benefit from their votes. And because they had no documents, they became vulnerable, even more vulnerable than they were previously, to arbitrary arrest, extortion, and deportation. The fact that the situation has been made worse with the fact that there is no end to the Rohingya influx. You see, even if public opinion can be brought around to accept Rohingya refugees, then another wave of Rohingya refugees is reported, and another wave. And there is nothing in the situation which tells us that this will be stopped in Myanmar. As far as we can see, this will continue to happen. So because it is an endless, apparently endless stream, public opinion has been going against the Rohingyas. If you go to Cox's Bazar and you look at the forests and the water, wetlands, these have all been stretched beyond their tolerance limit because Rohingya refugees have gone and cut down the forests, they've used the water sources. And it's not their fault, I mean, they have to survive, they are doing what they can. But the net effect is that the common resources of the area are under stress, and this has made public opinion go against them. So that in some cases you're beginning to see local reactions like loudspeaker announcements saying, turn out all of the Rohingyas from the village and hand them over to the police. Individual landlords have been evicting Rohingyas from their homestead. So this is symptomatic of the rupture of clientelist ties through which Rohingyas had worked out a strategy of survival with the locally influential people. To the extent that some of the locally influential people are no longer willing to support them, they've lost their basic means of survival. So to conclude on this complex and tragic story, as I said at the beginning, the government put official restrictions on the Rohingyas. Thou shalt not work, thou shalt not eat. You know, these are impossible rules. They had to break them. They had no choice, and they did. But because they have chosen to break those rules and to work and to get their own food, they've also exposed themselves to a whole range of protection risks from law enforcing agencies, local power holders, and criminal elements. The coping mechanisms used by the Rohingyas to survive, they've been innovative in certain kinds of ways. They've integrated themselves amongst the local population. Remember, option one was integration. The government refused to have this happen. In practice, 93% of the Rohingyas, the unregistered ones, have actually integrated themselves on their own. They've formed their own linkages with their patrons, they've given services, and they're treated and protected as clients. They have access to better and more diverse food by working in the villages and getting their own food compared to the refugees in the camps who get this powder supplied by UNHCR and WFP. They've also developed informal clientelist relationships with local power holders, giving them significant degrees of protection. So not protection from the state. The state is nowhere. It is from the local power structure that protection is obtained. The Rohingyas have made use of kinship and clientelist ties so that those who are already in Cox's Bazar have helped newcomers who come from across the Nak, from Myanmar. And so there is a process of chain migration. And also, if you think about it, formation of networks among refugees and a kind of community of Rohingyas being formed in Bangladesh, despite government restrictions, in spite of government restrictions. Confronted with the difficulties facing them, some Rohingyas have decided that enough is enough. They've got onto boats, they've become boat people, and they've tried their luck. Many have faced disasters. They've drowned, they've been captured by Thai police and Malaysian police, treated brutally, sometimes sent back into...
Yes.
Yeah. So in that sense, the option of resettlement, the third option, has also been realized, but again, not because of the government, but in spite of the government, by people trying out their own luck, their own initiative. So in that sense, you can say that the Rohingya refugees have become agency. Agency in the sense that they've not been constrained, they've not just accepted without any resistance the really adverse conditions in which they've been put, firstly by the Myanmar government and then by the Bangladesh government. They've tried their best to struggle against that and work out a survival strategy for themselves. One thing which I just want to point out in context, we normally think of strong people as having weapons, but even weak people have weapons if they know how to use it, if they're intelligent. What we see in the case of the Rohingyas is a strategic and innovative use of weapons of the weak. Those of you who've read James Scott will know about weapons of the weak, his study of how poor people and weak people survive against the rich and the powerful in a Malaysian village. Now, two last points, one on the government of Bangladesh. The government of Bangladesh, first of all, if one is trying to be fair to the government of Bangladesh, one thing that one has to say is that the government of Bangladesh is not creating this problem. The problem is created in Myanmar. And the government of Bangladesh has no power to stop that. It can only react. Now, initially, the government had welcomed the Rohingyas. It had provided camps. It had treated them as international refugees, which meant that they had legal protection and legal support. But because of the kind of pressures that I mentioned, the government changed its policy. It could not take any more Rohingyas. It decided to both to stop integration, to stop resettlement, and to force repatriation if it could. However, the government is a political animal. The government is not an abstraction. So it is responsive to powerful people in Cox's Bazar, people who need Rohingya labor, but who also are involved in the prostitution networks, the child trafficking networks, the women trafficking networks. So those interest groups have, to some extent, pressurized the government to allow the Rohingyas to come in and to stay. So this is, as I said before, these groups are not doing this for charity. They are doing it for their enlightened self-interest. They have something to gain, therefore, in their own interest, they have been doing this. Now, the Bangladesh government uses anti-Rohingya rhetoric and it is formally against any kind of accommodation. But again, to be fair, we should say that it has not turned out the entire Rohingya population. It has not sent them back by force across the border. It could have done it. It did not. It has not been helpful, but it has also not forced them out. I mean, we are dealing with very difficult situations, and small differences like that are also important. It's worth noting. So what this indicates is a certain ambivalence in the attitude of the government of Bangladesh. It is not particularly helpful towards the Rohingyas, but it cannot also go all the way to expel them because there are powerful interests within Bangladesh who want the Rohingyas to come. Okay? So the government is doing a balancing act. For public speeches, it's very anti-Rohingya. In practice, it is not really enforcing that much. Now, the last comment is on the role of international donor agencies and aid agencies. Now, aid and donor agencies have obviously, undoubtedly, expressed sympathy and support for the Rohingya refugees. They provided them with food and shelter, but they've actually done very little to stop the real reason for this. You don't see the UNHCR or the UN system or the Western powers actually putting pressure on the Myanmar regime, on the Burmese regime to stop the carnage. So one can, I think, rightly say that they have not taken the hard option. They've just given some consolation money, consolation resources, food aid to the Rohingyas, but they've not done much more. They've not done what should have been done. Specifically on the UNHCR, it has looked after Rohingya refugees and their interests up to a point, but it is also, I think, almost undoubtedly true, as has been alleged by Western NGOs as well, that the UNHCR has been complicit, has acted in collaboration with the government of Bangladesh in forcibly repatriating the Rohingya refugees. This is against the rules of the UNHCR. There is something called non-refoulement. I can't pronounce the French, but there is this principle that the UN cannot forcibly repatriate refugees. But in a sense, they have done that. So there are questions about the role of the UN agencies as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got some time now for asking questions. I think I will start with one question first. Well, I'd like to ask you, in Myanmar, there are various ethnic groups, and some of them are fighting guerrilla warfare, to try and protect their communities from the, the mainstream Myanmar, the government or ethnic group, from taking over, or they probably want some kind of autonomy or protection for their tribes and ethnic groups.
You're talking about the other groups, not
That's right, yeah. So has the Rohingyas ever thought about undertaking this kind of action to protect themselves, like arming themselves? Or has there been any request from Bangladesh government, Malaysia and other, to support Rohingyas to fight back inside Myanmar?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know the details, but I think there are some Rohingya resistance groups you will probably know more than I do. RFO, Rohingya, or Rohingya something organization, National Liberation Organization. Some small armed groups are known to be active. I don't know who funds them. Whether it, as you were suggesting, whether the government of Bangladesh or Southeast Asian governments are funding them, not as far as I know. But of course, governments have many mouths. I mean, in public they will say one thing, their intelligence agencies may still be up to something very different. It's possible, but I don't have any information on that. On the general question about minorities in Burma, virtually all minorities or all tribal groups have been fighting the Burmese state. So this is true of the Kachins, the Shans, the Karens, the Chin, you name it, all the groups have their own liberation fronts, armies, and so on. What the Burmese state has done, and the Burmese state in the military, the Tatmadaw, I think it's called, what they have done is they have realized they cannot fight all of these insurgent groups at the same time. So they've entered into what are called ceasefire agreements. And the ceasefire agreements are a way of telling the rebel group, look, you can still stay, we won't attack you, you can keep your arms, but you can listen to us and do what we want you to do. So in effect, the Burmese army and the government have co-opted many of these rebel groups. And you see this, for example, amongst the Karens. The Karens have two groups. One is a Christian Karen group, one is a Buddhist Karen group. Now, the Christian Karen resistance is still fighting the Burmese state, but the Buddhist Karens have become co-opted through ceasefires, and they are in a sense working as an agent of the Burmese government, the Burmese army. Now, as far as the Rohingyas are concerned, I don't think there are any groups which have come into ceasefire or are working as agents of the Burmese government. Nor am I sure whether the Burmese governments would want to have any agent amongst the Rohingyas, and they seem to have this attitude of total denial of Rohingyas as Burmese. But I doubt whether that has been the case. But I think there are at least two different armed groups of Rohingyas. How effective or powerful they are, I don't know. I don't think they are very powerful at the moment. But there are two.
Almost not existing.
But
almost not existing.
Almost not existing.
They don't have any activities.
Do you have the names?
Very, very insignificant, one group. Very insignificant. They don't have any activities. And government cannot point out this Rohingya as insurgency.
Do you have the names?
Sorry?
The names of the organizations?
The name of some also Rohingya Solidarity Organization.
Yes.
But they're insignificant. The Bangladesh government has seized everything. Bangladesh government has make not a restriction of the problem on those people. Their human rights. Because sometimes they have pollution with the government, but it's true. In suppressing those people.
Great.
Yeah.
So in those cases, the Burmese and the Bangladesh army are working together.
Yeah. So, may I ask you one question?
Sure.
That's
Please.
The Rohingya problem. It becomes long-standing problem not only for the Rohingya, but for Bangladesh as well. Immediately after the emergence of Bangladesh into influxes. Even these influxes happened not only in 1970, all during Pakistan time we have seen. Very time. So, and very forcefully it happened in 1978, this year, and followed by 1991. If the agreement, the Repatriation agreement signed between Bangladesh and Burma in 1978 and 1991-92, almost identical. If 1998 Repatriation agreement was effective, there would be no more the second time 1991.
Do you know what there was in the agreement, what the agreement said? The 1978 agreement. Do you know what it said?
Yeah.
What did it say?
No, this is actually, they have gone there They have gone, according to that repatriation agreement, they have gone to Burma not as a citizen of that country, but as a resident. Burmese accepted the word resident, technical term, okay, resident. Suppose he may be citizen or he may not be citizen. So as a resident, the Burmese said, we have not taken accepted you as a citizen of this country,
Okay.
as resident. So you have to, you are still, those people, as you mentioned, after repatriation, they are facing the same problem. So my question is, this Bangladesh will continue to bear the brunt of this problem until the root cause of the problem is solved. Even these are, you have mentioned something very graphically, that's how social problem is happening here. Otherwise, Bangladeshi brothers live on the border with whom we have got the century-old relationship and even the matrimonial relationship here. So how these people say that you cannot accept you, go back, go from this. Hate,
the people I think are quite receptive.
There are many demonstrations, Wiki and others.
Oh, okay.
Big demonstration.
Oh, yes.
Burmaya Hatao, Burmaya go back, go don't want Burmaya this. So for these things, do you think a Bangladesh government should adopt a policy on the way to resolve this issue? And they should raise this issue in the international forum. And all of you, including the YC and the UNO, and this, why Bangladesh is not going to do this? Or either our government or the BNP government, we have to be observed. So this is simply the allegation is that you people carry Rohingya, you are big burden on our order. Our strategic economy of Bangladesh, we are facing, we cannot accommodate them. This is the thing, and they're trying to force them, force repatriation you have mentioned. Still, this is going on. So, what role Bangladesh should play in resolving the refugee issue?
It's hard to speak on behalf of the government. I'm nobody of the government, so I can't tell the government what it should be doing. But I think you raise some very valid issues. And if, for example, the Bangladesh government were to raise the issue in international forums, like the OIC, and also the UN and so on, it could probably get some more support to be able to accommodate these refugees. But I also want to emphasize that the big Western powers, the United States, the UK, all the local powers, the ASEAN powers, are interested in contracts in Burma and resources, minerals, oil, gas, roads, railways. So they will not take a hard line with the Burmese government at the moment. And as you know, even the opposition leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, is not going to risk her popularity by supporting the Rohingyas. So basically, even if Bangladesh takes it to the international fora, we can see that the international fora is not giving the kind of pressure it could on the Burmese government.
The problem is now, what we see is that Burma has got some leverage now on the powerful countries.
Yes.
Everybody, America, UK, all these countries, they want business.
Exactly.
Burma knows it.
Exactly.
Even ASEAN.
Yes.
ASEAN want business.
Yes.
So this is the leverage on the Burma.
Yes.
So of course, they have got human rights commitment for democracy and human rights, by treaty obligation. So they used to make some recommendation, some condemnation. These condemnation and recommendation have not been translated into action. Yeah. So there should be, nobody give like a benchmark. You have to stop this. You have to, otherwise action has to fail. These Burma is encouraged of this. At the same time, Bangladesh is, the role Bangladesh is playing so far, this is apologistic approach. Completely apologistic approach. Apologistic approach means maybe some people might have gone to Burma, maybe keep them, give them a sort of some sort of facility to stay there. This, not completely, they have not taken any stand like this. This is the problem for them. Otherwise, during Pakistan time, they did not do this. They could not. They tried to have some create a problem. Even within 24 hours, they have to take the back. Even I saw myself.
During the Pakistan period?
Yeah. In 1975, there was a group of refugees. First time they put some refugees, about 300 people around IKEA, not in IKEA, in Choctaw area, which is inside there. 250 refugees, they came to Dhaka. I was there in Dhaka. You know, Sheikh Mujib was the Prime Minister, and his Mushur Rahman, one Mushur Rahman, he was the speaker or I don't know. The following day he was in Dhaka. Sheikh has given an attitude to Burma. Either you take these people within 24 hours or not. If not, I will respond to you. The question is the same thing. And then within 24 hours, believe me, they have taken back. That was, I mean, now the South African government, they are playing very applauded here. That's not compliment. That's the one thing. So I mean, this is it's very difficult to say. So without the cooperation of Bangladesh, without the Bangladesh should play a key role to resolve this because one of the interested parties in the problem. So if the problem is very difficult. We have to recover again, again, and we have to suffer. And this way, there will be no more refugees. Rohingya people now.
Let me ask you a question. Why not? Why can't the Rohingyas who are in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, can they mobilize those governments?
That is again problem. See, everybody pointed to Bangladesh. Even Saudi Arabia has raised the issue many times to Bangladesh. So you stand up on this issue, we'll help you. Nothing. Even you said about this last time, the former YC Secretary General, accumulated for the Turkish one, he visited Bangladesh months ago, and then he raised the issue with Sheikh Hasina, another Rohingya issue. She did not reply with response. She just evaded.
Why do you think she's not? She has been avoiding it. Is she afraid of any other power?
Which one?
I'm saying why are they not?
The problem I tell you, this is actually what happens. We need the help cooperation of Bangladesh, because the way things are going, we are completely friendless internationally and nationally within the country. Everybody demanding our expulsion. So suppose now the situation is, as you mentioned, this is a fact that
I could say
we are completely defenseless now. So in the absence of national protection, we need the international protection. International protection, this is it. So for international protection, nobody is interested for that. So by this, even we want, our people want to defend, to die in a harvest. This is in ourselves we do defend. We can do that, but who is helping us? This is also not possible. So this can only be done by Bangladesh.
I mean, I would say why Bangladesh government is not taking an efficient, effective role is that it's a mindset of the political regime.
But that's not an explanation, it's just shifting the problem from the Bangladesh government to its mindset. Why is the mindset like that? That's the question that changes to that.
That was the mindset.
Why is the mindset like that? What is determining Bangladesh government's responses?
Because it wants more. The same people who are trying to be friendly to Burma because of interests will probably be the same people that Bangladesh will also need for investment and so on. So I guess it all boils down to the same things.
Well, those countries will include the US, the UK, India also. India has big interests in Burma and wants oil and gas. Your answer would suggest that Bangladesh is concerned that its relationship with these countries are not affected because of that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
No, can I further,
Yes.
like, another, if it was the Muslims who are oppressing the Buddhists, would the reaction be different?
Where?
In Burma, if Buddhist refugees came into Bangladesh,
Yes.
would the reaction of the Bangladesh government be different? Would the international agencies and the news media and America and Britain and Suki, would it, because I think there is a Muslim-Islam dimension here, which is probably not being touched upon. I think that does play a part. You know, the psyche here, Bangladesh Awami government is known for a certain view towards Islam and Muslims, and it probably doesn't want to take another Muslim problem on its. It has a bigger problem within the country. Doesn't want to introduce another one from outside. So I agree with the interest, but the international silence says there is more. Burma isn't Saudi Arabia here. Let's get things into perspective. It doesn't have the oil that Saudi has, or the resources. So we're talking about a relatively untapped but smallish sized resource here. It is not going to shift America foreign policy all over. So the issue is, why is there silence? And I think it is the nature of the people themselves. Who are they? What do they represent? Where are they? Does it affect us strategically? If it doesn't, I think being Muslim now in the world isn't a good thing.
What about?
It will not help your cause. So I think that dimension has played a big role in how the world has reacted.
Yes.
I think you might be right a little bit, but I just want to.
I'm not a little bit. I think I'm right in a big way.
No, I just want to point out something which might contradict, you know, some of the things that you're saying. In the Chittagong hill tracts, you know, the Bengalis are taking over the lands of the hill people, right? And sometimes Bengalis have been quite violent towards them, and a large number of hill people, non-Bengal, they've actually gone to India as refugees, and there's not much international cry about that either. So you know, just to think about this as well.
Do you have an explanation of why there is this international silence?
I think it's if people can't relate to you, if Western people in the Western world can't relate to you and see you as another, then I think there is a problem, because at the moment, I mean, just to give you like, one person can die in this country and there'll be an uproar. The teacher who got shot by this child, killed by a student. Big headline news, because a death of a teacher is, you know, it's something very serious. But you could have like, I don't know, a couple of hundred people die of a bomb blast in Baghdad. A couple of hundred die in Syria and Damascus. A couple of hundred more in Afghanistan from the mudslide. And it won't hit the headlines. Because it doesn't translate in the same way in the Western society, Western media. Because we have as Muslims, I believe that we have a culture which is not understood, a way which is not understood, a religion which is not understood. So when you put all of that into the mix, and those people are then being oppressed or being unjustly treated, then I think the rest of the world can't relate to that. Doesn't show the same sympathy, doesn't have the same feeling, the strong sense of an injustice being done. And I think as Burmese Muslims are not seen as part of Burma, seen as a foreign entity which has entered into Burma, and a person who's received a peace has said very little. So you wonder whether she can relate to these people. Does she see them as her own people? Maybe not. I think that this other thing that being a Muslim, you're seen as an outsider, you're seen as something who could potentially be destabilizing, does play a factor. And there is this, I mean, for Buddhist people, the religion itself is so peaceful. You can't even harm an animal, an insect. And the same people can go and slaughter and burn and torture and rape. Says something about how they view the Muslims. We're seeing worse than the ant.
I think there is one other dimension here, which is that of racism.
Yeah.
One thing which comes up repeatedly in Burmese talk about Rohingyas is that they're dark-skinned, they're dark.
Ethnically different.
Ethnically different. So there is, religion is important. Religion is stereotyping of Islam and Muslims. But in addition, there is also the racial factor. And it's a combination of the two.
Yeah, it's not just a straightforward.
Yeah. And then that's taken up with the historical lack of historical knowledge, accurate historical knowledge. So it's perceived as if the Rohingyas all came over from Bangladesh during the British period. There is no knowledge of the Arakan kingdom where Alawar was a poet. There is very little knowledge that there was a Rohingya-based culture in Arakan centuries ago. So it's a common. I mean, but racism thrives on ignorance, as we know from different places. People don't know, and therefore they demonize other groups. This is exactly what has happened. It is very clear that Aung San Suu Kyi, but not just her, the entire Bharati's opposition, the NLD, those who are supposed to be the progressive forces against the military, as far as the Rohingyas are concerned, they're totally against the Rohingyas. Right?
No, she's not helping.
No, she's not helping, but what I'm saying is not just her. The entire NLD, the National Liberation, or National NLD,
National League for Democracy, her party.
none of them are.
No. Even in Rangoon, they took to the street. The other group demanding as far as Rohingya.
So this is the Burman group, right? The Burman.
Burman, unfortunately, what happened? Not only Burman, we see almost all the people in Burma. They are not helping the Burmese. Almost everybody.
So
here in London, yes, we have a group of Burmese group actually. Constituted of Rohingya, Shink, and then Burman, all this. And whenever there's some event, we join together, we work together. When we are on for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi, we cried here. But when the Rohingya issue 2012, when we called for the event, nobody come.
They don't come.
No.
So it is deep-rooted. It is deep-rooted.
I think we have to move on, right? Have a short break in the next one.
Okay.
Just want to say one thing. My own reading, I could be wrong, right? Why Aung San Suu Kyi is not really, speaking out strongly. One is maybe lack of moral courage, right? She showed courage in others. Wait a minute.
She stood for 30 years in house arrest and stood by principle. You can't say she doesn't have moral courage.
No, wait a minute.
That's undermining what she is.
No, you come back, let me finish. Okay? Sometimes people's moral courage can be contradictory as well, human beings. Right?
Contradiction you can say, but...
No, in this case it's lack of moral courage, but there could be a reason for it. Why I think, right, she clearly doesn't like what's happening and the oppression and the persecution of the Rohingyas. And she said it in different ways, right? But I think what she's worried about is the Burmese, the population, right? Whether, if she shows strong support or strong condemnation, then she could be labeled and marginalized. That's the calculation she's probably making. I wouldn't make this calculation, right? But she's making this calculation based on her experience of Burmese politics. How it's going to turn out in the long run, we don't know. If she can't get into power, then she can't do anything with the Rohingyas, right? And if she speaks out very strongly, then she might be undermined. Sometimes you make calculations like that, right? Only history will tell, whether it was good or not. So you can come back, then we stop this session.
She made two serious statements with the Bible. One is during her visit to India.
Yes.
And she said there is still problem of illegal immigration on Bangladesh with Arakan border.
She said that.
She said, the other thing to the media. The other thing is no ethnic cleansing is going on in Bangladesh. No ethnic cleansing
is going on.
So I think the statement, I might maybe put it very eloquently with facts. My reading of the situation, I'm no expert on Burma, but when it did happen, I was looking around to see is there anything from this woman, because she's lauded as a peace, and someone who stood up for justice for so long, sacrificed her marriage, her children, career, everything for her people. So you would have expected something more than this mute response from her. and to add sort of insult to this is that she said there is no genocide or there is no killing. You know, it's sporadic. I think she used the word that it's isolated cases. So I think your reading is completely off the mark.
Maybe,
Yeah.
but like people make judgment. I'm not saying
No, it's not judgment. This is fact-based.
And sometimes people think what's lesser evil, right? And it and they don't necessarily write judgment, but this is how people make judgment. I think we'll end this. We'll have a.
I have one point on when you mentioned about Aung San Suu Kyi. Like as Uncle Nur Islam have mentioned, we have been working with democracy. We have supported her for a long time, or the Rohingya. Like when after this violence happened, Rohingya is a completely human rights watch have mentioned ethnic cleansing. They have people there in Arakan. They have properly investigated the issue. They found out this ethnic cleansing. They have international lawyers and that. But when you talk about those Aung San Suu Kyi, she did not even go. We repeatedly requested her party and her to visit to the areas, look at the situation and
Where there was riots and so on. To visit those areas where there was
visit Arakan state to speak up for the road.
Okay.
What is happening there. But instead of visiting there, she dismissed that this is not ethnic cleansing. So she said that I can't talk about any part. I can't be biased, but it does not make a sense that she should be biased, but she has to see what the findings Human Rights Watch and 45 Rights, like they have proper, well-documented findings what happened to Arakan state. They visited there, they interviewed the people, and they found out, they released the report. So we can't believe why she straight away dismissed that it's not ethnic cleansing. That is a kind of, you can see how the situation is moving ahead. She might have political issues. She can't get the vote and she can't speak up. That is the other issue. As a Nobel Peace Prize winner, as a Nobel laureate, she had to speak up.
But
these are human beings. You can't give the people this.
She's being a politician. She's not being a Nobel laureate. Would you say that? But she's behaving like a politician who needs to be concerned about her votes and therefore tailors what she says.
Yes, but in the case of injustice, she has to speak up. She's an
exactly,
icon.
but she's not living
but
to those
that is
people.
what she.
So she's a lesser person than we thought.
She's defending herself.
She's a
She
lesser
could have
person.
saved many lives actually. She could have saved many lives in this struggle.
So this is what is, I think, disappointing.
Yeah, very disappointing.
I think it's also, when you analyze, it's also good to have empathy, try and understand why, how their mind works, I think we have to, we're going to have about a few minutes break. We can have some refreshment and we go on to the next part.